Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1024 for October 1st, 2023. Coming up in a few minutes.
The style of the distillate, how it's interacted over the past 12 years, and the result is just what I think is a truly exceptional whiskey that is, I feel incredibly proud just to be part of seeing this one come to life.
Diageo's Dr. Stuart Morrison has been busy this weekend showing off Diageo's 2023 special releases at the Whiskey Show in London, but he took a few minutes to run through the collection with me. Our conversation is just ahead on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have a bonus interview this week with Donnis Todd, the head distiller at Texas's Garrison Brothers Distillery. They just released the 9th edition of their Cowboy Bourbon, uncut and unfiltered. This year's batch came in at just over 70% ABV. I'll have my tasting notes for it in the What I'm Tasting This Week department. We'll also have Behind the Label and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Robin Redbreast? You may have seen me around. Face label, label face. Yeah, that's the one. I'm now contractually obligated to be their spokesbird. Yeah, my agent didn't read the small print.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
How about a really great 12-year-old Scotch whiskey? I have a stellar recommendation coming up for you in just a minute. Spoiler alert, it's Dewar's 12-year-old.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Last time around, I warned that the Treasury Department's Tax and Trade Bureau label approval process for new whiskeys would be affected if the federal government was forced to shut down. Congress approved a 45-day extension to the current budget late Saturday night that will keep federal agencies funded through mid-November. Now let's update a story we first brought you back in February after Kentucky and federal alcohol regulators staged raids at the Justin's House of Bourbon shops in Louisville and Lexington, along with a satellite facility in Washington, D.C. Now comes word from the Lexington Herald-Leader that Kentucky officials are seeking to shut down both stores and revoke their liquor licenses for a series of violations. The list includes accusations that Justin's illegally transported bottles in and out of the state, illegally bought and sold alcoholic beverages, and violated the state's vintage distilled spirits purchase law. According to state records obtained by the Herald-Leader, Justin's bought and sold rare bourbons that did not qualify as, quote, vintage. In May, Justin's owners agreed to pay $3,000 in fines after admitting to 2 violations of liquor regulations in Washington, D.C., where they operate a mail-order bourbon business. Justin Thompson, Justin Sloan, and their attorney have not commented on the story. No criminal charges have been filed in the case. Buffalo Trace's new range of Prohibition-era whiskeys won't qualify as vintage. The distillery is bringing back 5 long-gone labels in a Prohibition collection, including Old Stag, the predecessor of today's George T. Stagg Bourbon, Golden Wedding, Three Feathers, and Walnut Hill. The final addition in the collection is George T. Stagg Spiritus Frumenti, which was the generic name for the medicinal whiskey the George T. Stagg Distillery made during Prohibition. The 5-bottle set will come in a custom wooden display case and sell for $999.99 a set. What may be the world's oldest bottles of Scotch whisky will go on the auction block next month. About 40 bottles of whisky were discovered behind a hidden cellar door at Blair Castle late last year, and research from the castle's archives and carbon dating technology suggests the whisky dates back to the early 1800s. Whiskey Auctioneer is handling the auction and says records show the whiskey is believed to have been distilled in 1833 and bottled in 1841, then rebottled in 1932. 24 of the bottles will go on the auction block next month. Turning to Ireland now, where Brown-Forman's Slane Distillery at Slane Castle has been laying down stocks of single malt whiskey for several years, along with grain whiskey and single pot still whiskey. Co-founder Alex Cunningham says the distillery reached a milestone this summer.
So our single malt just passed 5 years old this summer because we started distilling in 2018. It's not quite ready yet, but it's coming together really nicely. And then about 3 months ago, we were able to start putting some of our own malt into the Slane triple cask blend. So that's a nice milestone for us. It marks the beginning of the transition over to our own liquid.
How long do you think that transition is going to take?
It's going to take some time because the liquid that we originally purchased was different ages. And you've got to be very careful for consistency of quality. You're not suddenly going to jump. This is something that will happen slowly over time. But it's great to see that journey having finally started.
I talked with Alex Cunningham at Slane's halfway to St. Patrick's Day party in New York the other night. Scotch whisky tourism has recovered from the pandemic, with more than 2 million people visiting distilleries last year. New data from the Scotch Whisky Association shows whisky visitor centres have become Scotland's top tourism attraction collectively, with visitor traffic up more than double from the pandemic-affected year of 2021. For the first time, domestic visitors from the UK topped 1 million and made up 51% of all whisky tourism. The U.S. accounted for 4 out of every 10 international visitors, while Germany, the Netherlands, and France rounded out the top 5 countries for Scotch whisky tourism. Maine's Wiggly Bridge Distillery has had its expansion plans shot down by local officials. The planning board in York, Maine, rejected the distillery's application to expand its facilities because of concerns over whiskey fungus. Neighbors had complained that fungus caused by the distillery's existing operations has spread on their properties, and a study done by the town earlier this year backed up those claims, according to Portland TV station WMTW. A couple of collaborations between the worlds of music and whiskey to mention now. Metallica's latest blackened whiskey collaboration is with Rabbit Hole founder Kavazamanian. They blended together a 13-year-old Tennessee bourbon with Rabbit Hole's High Gold Double Malt Bourbon, then finished the blend in Calvados casks while subjecting it to Blackened's proprietary Black Noise sound enhancement process. I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at the WhiskyCast website. Meanwhile, Ballantine's has released the second whiskey in its True Music Icons collection, and AC/DC gets the honors after Queen was honored with the first release. It's available in the UK with a recommended retail price of £24.95 a bottle. Finally, Duncan Taylor is releasing a 1983 Port Ellen as part of its Rarest Collection series. The 40-year-old single malt was distilled in March of 1983, just weeks before Port Ellen closed that May. It'll sell in the U.S. for a recommended retail price of $7,300 a bottle, with just 209 bottles available worldwide. I'll have my tasting notes available for it soon at whiskycast.com. That's also where you can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long, as well as in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's take a look at the calendar of events and see what's coming up around the world. Tickets are still available for Whiskey at the Beach this coming Thursday night in Long Branch, New Jersey, along with the Great American Whiskey Fair Friday night in Columbia, South Carolina. The Austria Whiskey Messe is this Friday and Saturday in Liebersdorf, Austria. Bourbon on the Banks is Friday and Saturday in Frankfort, Kentucky. The York Whiskey Festival is on Saturday in York, England. And Sagamore Spirit's first ever Harvest Festival is Saturday and Sunday at Sagamore Farm outside Baltimore. Edinburgh's Whiskey Festival takes place on the 14th in Scotland. Whiskey Live Paris is October 21st through the 23rd, and Whiskey Fest San Francisco is October 27th. Those are just a few of the events on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it, and we'll add it to the calendar.
Gabriel here. The new Dewar's 12-year-old has been completely remastered to be richer, smoother, and more balanced. It's a total winner. It's double-aged in first-fill premium bourbon casks for greater depth and breadth of flavor, with notes of apples, lemon zest, and spicy and floral notes with a long, smooth vanilla finish. The experts agree too. It's winning awards like pros sink putts. In fact, WhiskyCast's own Mark Gillespie gave it a 94-point rating, which is pretty amazing for a 12-year-old Scotch. It's also earned a 94-point rating from Whiskey Advocate. That makes it their highest-rated 12-year-old Scotch whiskey. It's an excellent testament to the skill, craft, and refinement of the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's. Drink responsibly. Copyright 2023 Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlach and the Classic Malts lineup. Every year, Diageo's blending team comes up with a series of special Scotch whiskies. This year's special releases includes a Mortlach finished in tequila casks, one of the oldest Glenkinchie bottlings ever, and the first ever bottling from Rose Isle Distillery. Dr. Stuart Morrison is the master blender behind this year's special releases, and before he left for London to show them off this weekend at the Whiskey Show, he spent some time with me on a Zoom call. What was your philosophy as you put these 8 single malts together? Was there a common thread between them?
Hi, Mark. So the concept for this year is Spirited Exchange. So it really is a celebration of Scotch's role in the world and the things that have served to inspire Scotch. So that's why we looked a little bit beyond our shores just to get inspiration for these 8 wonderful whiskies.
And you used things like Japanese Kanasuke casks.
Yeah, we did. So for the Mortlach, what we did was we finished it in 2 types of casks. We used the Kanasuke casks, which are ex-American oak, ex-bourbon casks, which have found their way over to Japan, and we also used some Pinot Noir in order just to accentuate that savoury umami character that you get in Mortlach.
What about the other ones? You used things like putting Lagavulin in tequila casks.
Yes, we did. That was a very exciting project, and it was great to be part of it from the very, very beginnings all the way through to bottling. So we spoke kindly to our colleagues in Diageo, Mexico, who sorted us out with some tequila casks. We sent them over, we filled them with mature Lagavulin, and we found it accentuated that fruity herbal style of character that you get in Lagavulin. It's a truly exceptional whiskey.
And this tranche includes the first ever distillery bottling of Rose Isle.
They do. I mean, all of these 8 whiskies are all incredibly proud of every single one of them. They've all got a story to tell. I'm sure I'm going to spend many hours over the next weekend going to great level of detail about what everything means. But Rose Isle it may be the cherry on the cake. The reason being it's its first ever launch in the world. The distillery came on stream in spring 2009. And we've been keeping our eye on the quality on the stocks for many, many years. In fact, one of the very first things I did when I joined the business, in order to get my head around things like cask sampling and administration and HMRC and the finer details of what's involved in being a whiskey maker, it was actually to bring in some Rose Isle casks and check the quality. And all these years later, I've found myself in an incredibly privileged position to be responsible for the very first release of this distillery.
What's it taste like?
It tastes exceptional, I have to say. So there are huge fruity flavours present within there. So as you may know, Rose Isle can create different styles of distillate depending on the parameters that they set within the distillery. In the first year or so of operation, they created a green grassy style of spirit. They also created a fruity style of spirit. And we did a little bit of nutty in there as well. So we focused in on the more fresh green style as almost the beating heart of the bottling. And we've also got a little bit of fruity and more kind of fresh fruits and a little bit of nutty in there just to add a little bit of breadth to the texture. But we also, we filled these into refill casks and also first fill ex-bourbon casks. So everything, there's a lot of harmony going on in terms terms of the influence of the casks, the style of the distillate, how it's interacted over the past 12 years. And the result is just what I think is a truly exceptional whiskey that is, I feel incredibly proud just to be part of seeing this one come to life.
Any interesting stories about the other whiskies in the tranche?
There's lots of interesting stories. So when we were coming together with the concept, it was about spirited exchange and cultural exchange, and we were looking first and foremost at flavour. What are the different flavours that we would have that have influenced and had a lot of sway over our industry over the past however many 100 years? But it's not just about looking into the annals of history. We've done something a little bit different, like you mentioned there, the Canasuka casks for the Mortlach and the tequila casks that we've used for the Lagavulin. We've used our experience with things like the Talisker, for instance. Talisker Portree has been something that we've looked after for, it's coming up 10 years now. So we really know how the style of Talisker distillate works with port casks and that particular style. So what we did is we looked at European oak casks for the Talisker, and it gives us something different compared to Talisker Portree, but it's a fantastic, there's some wonderful, wonderful textures there. But when we were looking at the influences that we've had over Scotch, it wasn't just about the whiskey. There were other industries we were paying attention to as well, whether it was craftsmanship, flavours, culinary styles. There were various different influences, not just in the spirit, but also on myself and the things that inspired me and gave me the motivation. Now, the special releases project takes quite a long time to come together. You could be all cliche and say the start of this project started in 1995 when the Glencairn spirit was laid into cask. But I came back from family leave in June 2022 straight into this project, and now all these months later, years and a few months later, we're seeing it come to life. So it's a really long in the making project, but it's been what a journey.
And you've already started working on next year's too, right?
I have, yeah. So it's been interesting switching gears in the mind. So for the past few months, I've been focusing on what our special releases potentially could be next year. But I kind of parked that a week or so ago because I need to get my mind back into this. We bottled these a few months ago, and you almost just have to put it on the shelf for a little bit, focus on the here and now. But now we're at the launch stage. The world is ready to receive these wonderful whiskies, and it's now up to us to get out there and start telling the stories and hope that people get liquid on lips and really get to enjoy these flavours.
Anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
Oh, goodness me. We've got a wonderful Klein leash there as well. Everyone loves a Klein leash. The inspiration for that one was our Distillery Visitor Centre. So as part of the reopening after it became part of the Johnny Walker Four Corners concept, we had a fill your own bottle there, which is first fill bourbons. And when I discovered that, it's maybe, I think it was 11 years old there or thereabouts, but the fruitiness that was present in that really accentuated the waxy character of Klein leash. And if someone asks you for an idea about, tell me something that's really good, you can't sit on things. You just feel so, come on, let me show you this. You've got to try this, you've got to try that. For the Oban as well, doing the rum cask finish, Oban to me it's a wonderful place, a wonderful distillery with some fantastic people working there. Natural maritime connections with Oban as well. Take 20 or 30 steps out the front door and your toes are touching the water. And it just felt like such a natural idea. But the Oban itself, with the bright, fruity, some of these crisp orchard fruits that come through in the Oban, it just lent itself to the idea of finishing in rum casks where you can dial up that brightness, dial up those top notes. And it just made for such a fantastic whiskey. With the Glendullan as well, Glendullan has a lot of fresh fruity top notes. And what we were wanting to do is identify casks that really just brought things in a little bit, made it a little bit more rounded, a little bit richer. So that's where we've used ex-Chardonnay casks. And they have just done absolute wonders, really fleshing out the flavour, fleshing out the character, and giving us again, I say this word, exceptional. It is just an exceptional whiskey. But the oldest one in there is the Glenkinchie, that at 27 years old, you're taking care and attention for something that has just spent so long in a cask. It's been maturing slowly at the distillery since 1995. And I looked at those casks around 2013, 2014, I remember, and they were coming along nicely. There was a lot of distillery character there. We just left them. Who knows when the opportunity presents itself? But here we are. We were looking for something that really just spoke of the distillery character, and the floral character that comes through is truly exceptional. It is almost a delicate bouquet, but for whatever reason, it's really held on to its strength at 58%. It's for a whiskey so old, it is not given much away. A great discovery, a great find, and it's going to be great just getting to show these off.
That's 8 whiskeys. Texas's Garrison Brothers Distillery releases just one special whiskey each year. Head distiller Donnis Todd selects special barrels for his Cowboy Bourbon, so strong that it's considered to be a hazardous material when it's shipped. He joined me on a Zoom call the other day. You guys had a big party at the distillery the other day. Tell me about it.
Yes, sir. We released our Garrison Brothers Cowboy Bourbon, which is an uncut, unfiltered version of our wheated bourbon. Last Saturday we did our distillery release and sold about 1,000 bottles of that hazmat. Turned out 140.9. The 9th time that I've put Cowboy together for Dan and Charlie, and it was a great time. We sold all the bottles we had for the distillery as quick as the iPad wheel would spin. So,
tell me first of all how you hooked up with Dan and Charlie.
Yeah, I spent 10 years in the Air Force, and I fell in love with Texas and Texans and how proud Texans are. No matter where the Air Force sent me, I always knew exactly where the Texans were. Sometimes before we even had a shower or a bathroom, the Texans already had their flag up, and I was like, man, I want to be on their team. That's a proud bunch of folks. And most of the Air Force training happens in Texas. And while in the service, I just fell in love with Texans. And when I decided that, I was going to be all done in the United States Air Force, I'm like the bumper sticker. I got here as quick as I could.
And how'd you get into whiskey?
I grew up around the distillation process. My grandfather made corn whiskey and built stills. So my mom was a custodian at my high school. My dad was a truck driver for Ford Motor Company. And my grandpa made corn whiskey for a living. So what school bus do you think I got off of?
What'd you learn from your grandfather?
So my grandfather I fell in love with the stories that my grandfather told. And at a young age, I quickly realized that most of them were fabricated, but I would edge them on to tell those stories anytime anybody new came by the tool and die shop. So I actually fell in love with the stories that my grandpa had. And from a young age, I said, I want to have my own stories. So that's what I learned from my grandpa. Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Well, tell me the story of Cowboy Bourbon.
Yeah, it's a bunch of piggy banks. You remember when you were a little kid, I wanted everything as a little kid, as most kids do. And it's not possible that mom and dad get everything. I didn't understand that. So I'd get a little frustrated. I'd get a little pissed off. I'd run into the bedroom and grab my piggy bank. I'd shake my piggy bank because I thought I could figure out how much money I had or didn't have. And I've really never grown up. So my small batch bourbon is 50 to 55 barrels that I hand select and marry together. And I do that over and over and over to make Garrison Brothers Texas Straight Bourbon Whiskey small batch. I come across barrels in the inventory that are almost completely empty, and I just mark piggy bank on them. Now, the reason I call it a piggy bank is because I shake the barrel to see if there's anything even left. I think I can figure out from the slosh, oh yeah, there's 5 or 6 bottles in there, whatever it is. I don't taste them right then and there because it just blow my palate out. I don't know. Have you ever licked a Kool-Aid packet? If you have, that's kind of what sipping on a Cowboy right from the barrel is all that flavor is really concentrated. So I don't taste it right then and there. I just kick all the piggy banks to the side. Then once a year, I marry all those. I work my way through all those piggy banks. I marry the ones together that I think will play well. And we don't add any water. We run it through no filtration. We fill as many bottles as those piggy banks will produce. This year, the ninth release of Cowboy happened to be 140.9 proof. So pretty potent Kool-Aid packet there.
That's the strongest you've released, right?
Yes, sir, it is. That's the first time it broke the 140 mark. I've had some 137s, 135s, 136s, but that's the first one up over $140.
What does distilling a whiskey like that taste like?
So the White Dog, we're working really, really hard. So the raw distillate, the clear liquid coming off our stills in the bourbon world, we call it White Dog. We're working really, really hard here. They're all pot stills ran by 16 amazing dream makers. And, so it is handcrafted. All the White Dog tastes a little bit different, but we're working real hard to make where you get some canned sweet corn, a little bit of toasted marshmallow. You don't want to have a medicinal, fire water coming off your still. You got to have some flavor, but, about 135 proof, we cut that down with rainwater to 124 proof and fill our brand new oak barrels that are toasted and charred. So that original raw distillate is very similar, day in and day out. There's there's some minor changes just because it's made by my team and everybody's a little different. But throughout the aging process, every barrel leaks some. Then you put that barrel here in Texas where it can be extremely hot for month after month after month. But it's more than just hot. We have 30 to 40 degree temperature swings almost every day. So, this morning, when I drove to work, I saw 67, 68, outside temperature, and they're saying it's going to feel like 107 today. And it's almost time to go trick or treating, but that's a severe temperature swing. We're going to get a ton of extraction from that white American oak today, but those Cowboy barrels, every barrel leaks, some turn into piggy banks. Then I put that barrel in the harshest environment you can imagine. It ends up being a Texas survivor. I take that piggy bank, put it in a metal shipping container, leave it in there up to 8 years. If there's any liquid left, it's Cowboy bourbon. Not much water, whole lot of bourbon.
And not much whiskey left in those barrels when it's all said and done, right?
It is not. Yeah, no, we're getting 1 or 2 gallons from it.
Tell me about your regular bourbon.
Yeah, it's a great, we have a beautiful portfolio. We call it the Rainbow. All of our bottles are hand dipped in wax. Each expression has its own color of wax. The workhorse here, how my wife buys her shoes, is my small batch bourbon. We're truly blessed. Can't make enough of it. Always trying to fill the next wave of POs. And it's 50 to 55 barrels that I hand select and marry together. It's a great wheated bourbon. So no rye in the recipe, 74% corn, 15% wheat, 11% barley malt. I'm a firm believer that, wheated bourbon should be a little sweet on the front, hold together through the palate, long and lingering, not get on the side of your palate, make you chew and think about it a little bit, just enough that you want another sip. And that's what we strive to do day in and day out here at Garrison Brothers, is just make a great wheated bourbon, make small batch bourbon. But by hand tasting every barrel, I'm not so lucky that every barrel works. Some don't play well with others. I'll make them single barrel. They stand alone. They check all the boxes, but they won't get along with anybody else. Those become single barrels. And some have a honey note, so I'll make honeydew, just on and on and on. So we let the bourbon decide on what it the voice for it when it comes time to make a decision.
Why wheated bourbon? Why not rye?
Yeah, so I make a wheated bourbon because Dan Garrison, our founder, he's not a rye guy. He thinks rye is a little too spicy. He likes a sweeter bourbon on the front. So this mash bill is a wheated mash bill because the guy that signs the checks and pays the bills, he's not a rye guy. We did throw him a birthday party a couple of years back, and I introduced a high rye. Just Dan's Garrison's birthday is December 5th, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know what December 5th is. What a great birthday for a gentleman who owns a bourbon distillery. So he thought it was just a party for December 5th, and a birthday party, but it was really our high rye release. We live in High, Texas, HYE, so I had to make a high rye.
And of course, December 5th is the anniversary of the end of Prohibition, for those who aren't familiar with that date on the calendar. You guys had the first Texas distillery since the end of Prohibition. What does that mean for you guys?
Well, we're the first ones to make bourbon legally. Tito was way out in front of us, and he has a distillery up in Austin, Texas, and he makes a couple bottles of vodka here and there. So let's make sure no one thinks that we're saying we're the first distillery in Texas. We happen to be the first legal bourbon distillery in Texas. That's our claim to fame. But
I mean whiskey distillery when I say that.
Yeah. It just means that we were the first ones that did it legally and decided to pay the bills on it and not risk going to jail. But there's been lots of Texas making lots of whiskey long before we got our state permit. I'm sure of it.
What does the weather do to your whiskey?
It makes unbelievable bourbon, and it makes you dedicated. There's no hesitation. If you want to make bourbon whiskey in Texas, you really want to do it. This isn't a walk in a park. We call it a Texas Survivor, but it's hard on our team, our dream makers. We call our production operators dream makers, and it's hard on the body. It's hard on the equipment. It can take its toll. Long hot days that stretch deep into the fall and start early in the spring. So you got to really want to do it. But what's left in that barrel is magical, and it's well worth it.
Thanks to Donnis, Todd of Garrison Brothers and Diageo's Dr. Stuart Morrison for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start with the Garrison Brothers 2023 Cowboy Bourbon. It's bottled at a whopping 70.45% ABV, and the nose has touches of wheat bread, honey, sawdust, cocoa powder, and black cherries. The taste starts off with dark fruits and intensely spicy notes of cinnamon, allspice, and chili powder that fade slowly to reveal touches of dark chocolate, honey, and pecan pie. The finish has lingering cinnamon spice along with caramel and a touch of red apples for a warm and soothing dram. I'm scoring the Garrison Brothers 2023 Cowboy Bourbon a 90. Had the chance to taste the Russell's Reserve 13-year-old bourbon the other night with Eddie and Bruce Russell. It's bottled at 57.4% ABV, and the nose has touches of caramel, honey, brown sugar, and hints of apples and peaches. The taste is thick and chewy with white pepper, allspice, and a hint of cinnamon, balanced by honey, apples, and peaches. The finish is long with lingering spices and tree fruits. I'm scoring the Russell's Reserve 13-year-old bourbon a 94. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, a 200-time award-winning Maryland-style rye whiskey. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, Sagamore's team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature, double oak, cask strength, or reserve series of ryes, as well as their line of premium rye whiskey canned cocktails at a retailer near you. Visit sagamorespirit.com/find-rye. Please drink responsibly. Continuing our look at cask strength whiskeys now, let's look at the Bunnahabhain 12-year-old cask strength single malt. This one is bottled at 60.1% ABV, and the nose has notes of caramel, toffee, dried fruits, and a hint of potpourri spices. The taste is mouth-coating with a delayed burst of baking spices and hints of figs, toffee, caramel, and charred oak. The finish is very long with lingering spices, toffee, and figs in an excellent balance. I'm scoring the Bunnahabhain 12-year-old cask strength a 92. And finally, let's look at the oldest ever release from Dewar's, the Double Double 37-year-old. This one is a blended malt finished in ex-Oloroso sherry casks that had previously been used for Altmore single malt, and it's bottled at 48% ABV. The nose has touches of figs, toasted oak, plums, a hint of hazelnut, and grilled peaches. The taste is sweet with a touch of allspice and notes of honey, figs, and caramel candy, on top of apricots, peaches, and a hint of spearmint. The finish is long and tongue-tingling with lingering allspice and a hint of spearmint. I like the complexity and balance on this one, and I'm scoring the Dewar's Double Double 37-year-old blended malt a 95. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,500 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. Two homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app and see what's happening this week. Our community segment is brought to you by Waterford Whiskey. First off, Cars and Cubes posted this note on Instagram after last week's episode with Ardbeg's Colin Gordon. I look forward to catching this episode. I made my first trip to the distillery earlier this year. It's a magical place. That it is. And speaking of Ardbeg, Tyrone Cote posted this note in the app the other day. I had a chance to try Ardbeg's The Harpy's Tale yesterday. I have a sweet tooth, and this was like an ice cream Ardbeg float. The sweet sauternes immediately coated both sides of my tongue, and then faded as classic Ardbeg notes came to the fore. Loved this one. Glad you liked it, Tyrone. And Aline Wagner is at the Whiskey Show in London this weekend. She posted photos of a couple of vintage Lafroigs from the Rare Drams table, along with this comment. At the Whiskey Show, not sure I can recover after this, totally different peat in both bottles. The 14 years is a bottling for the U.S., much more meaty and less smoke. The one from 80's 10-year-old was bottled for Germany and is lighter and sweeter in comparison. Both life-changing. And the Tracer Bullet posted this comment on the Buffalo Trace Prohibition Collection. Pretty neat until I saw the neat price. And by the way, that $999.99 price tag is for 375 ml bottles. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download the free WhiskyCast community app from the Apple or Google app stores and join the conversation. Of course, you can also reach us on traditional social media apps, too. Look for WhiskyCast on Threads, X, Instagram, and Facebook, or you can email us, too. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey, where they explore the frontiers of natural flavor one farm at a time to create unique Irish whiskeys. Visit them on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. Barley is barley, right? Well, not so fast, my friend. There are different types of barley that produce different results depending on what kind of whiskey you're trying to make. For instance, Jack Daniel's master distiller Chris Fletcher found out early on that making a single malt whiskey required a different type of barley than the traditional Jack Daniel's recipe, which uses so-called distiller's malt. He explained the difference between that distiller's malt and pale malt the other day on a Zoom call with whiskey writers.
For the 12% that we use in the Tennessee whiskey or our bourbon whiskey and in our rye whiskey, that 12%, we need it to be very high in basically enzyme activity, which was a measurement. One of the main measurements we use is called diastatic power, which is basically the potential that malt has to enzymatically break down starch. And so that tends to be barley that is thinner physically, smaller, also higher in protein, but lower in extract or carbohydrate starch. Now that we quickly realize, obviously when you make the shift to a 100% malted barley recipe, the level of that enzyme activity doesn't have to be nearly as high because it's 100% malted. And so there's automatically plenty of the enzyme being delivered at 100% malt to break down all the starches that are going to be coming in with the malt. With corn and with rye, not necessarily the case. And so we felt quickly, the character of the whiskey by moving, it's a form of a pale malt, typically more of a brewer's malt is what we moved to. And we felt like that instantly gave the distillate a little more character, a little more richness, certainly more, I guess, kind of that, I called it kind of nutty, or I also describe it as kind of biscuity type of quality to the spirit. And so that was one of the very first things that we did right off the bat.
You can find my tasting notes for the Jack Daniel's American Single Malt in last week's episode and at whiskycast.com. If there's something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Threads, X, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple or Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Find the new Dewar's 12-year-old and discover what all the awards are about. You can toast and thank me later. From Dewar's, the world's most awarded blended Scotch whisky.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2023, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.